And we're back in the car like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Saturday afternoon here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Well, we have another boxing-themed episode on the way. You know how much I love talking about the greats of the sport, whether it's Iron Mike Tyson, Sugar Ray Leonard, Ray Robinson, Big George Foreman, Lennox Lewis, or any of the greats from today or from yesteryear. Well, today is a yesteryear kind of day because on this day, 1972, 53 freaking years ago, Muhammad Ali, in a non-title fight as he was on the comeback trail a year and a half after the fight of the century, when Joe Frazier got him in the first fight, winning a tough fight, but a clear points victory at Madison Square Garden in the so-called fight of the century. Ali was incredibly busy. You look at the number of fights he had after Frazier in 71, he fought 4 times, and he was fighting, it seems like, every 6 to 8 weeks throughout 1972, trying to stay busy, trying to stay sharp. But what makes this a very unusual and interesting historical marker. It's not just, it's 53 years since an Ali fight. You know, he only had 61 fights as a professional, so every one of his professional fights, you could say, is important. But this particular fight took place at Croke Park in Dublin, Ireland. Now, Ali was very much a citizen of the world. He traveled all over the place when he was healthy, and after he retired, when his health went downhill significantly over time, it just kept going downhill more and more. Unfortunately, he was only 74 when he died. He lived a very full life, obviously, but it's not really that old. In the last 20 years, health just declined, and it was really very sad. But he traveled all over. He fought in Europe. Before his exile period, he had various fights. He fought in Germany, he fought in England. He just moved around. He visited as many countries as he could, tried to, kind of interact with as many different cultures and people as possible. But he didn't randomly end up in Ireland. At a certain point in time, Muhammad Ali learned that one of his great-grandfathers had emigrated from Ireland. So it is a true statement to say that Ali was part Irish. And far be it from him to reject it or say this can't be right, this is not true. He embraced it. And in his later years, he traveled to Ireland on several occasions. And in 2009, this is something you can look up, he accepted a special award recognizing him as something of a favorite son of Ireland. So he decided he wanted to have a fight in Ireland, and he picked a friend of his, a terrific boxer, Alvin Lewis, whose nickname was Blue. I always thought that was a weird nickname, but it was one of those, it was an accidental nickname. He was known as Alvin Lewis at first, and whoever heard that made a mistake and wrote down Blue for the nickname. Didn't hear Alvin Lewis. He thought he said Alvin Blue Lewis. And it was so cool that Alvin Lewis then became Blue. Like that was his nickname. So Ali fought Alvin Lewis. Alvin Lewis had defeated Cleveland Williams. Cleveland Williams was famously on the receiving end of, Ali's insane skill set that he showed that night at the Houston Astrodome in '66. And Lewis had been a sparring partner for Ali before and then after, and he also was a sparring partner for Ken Norton and George Foreman. But people like that, the top enders, they used Lewis because they knew that he was not going to take it easy on them. There were certain people, and you can't blame them. And George Foreman, the first iteration of George, was notorious for this. He would have his training partners, his sparring partners instructed, give George what you got. Problem was, if you tried to crack George, he was going to look to put you in the hospital. So you had to be careful. But Alvin Lewis was one of those guys, he didn't give a fuck. And George knew, if we tell him, go after me, he will. He's going to give me his best in sparring, and let's just fucking go. So 53 years ago today, in front of a bit of a hometown crowd, because by that point people knew, holy shit, the former champ at the time, he was only 30, he's got Irish roots. And the great-grandfather's name was Abe Grady. And I've never seen any pictures Well, I don't actually think there would be any pictures of Abe Grady because supposedly he emigrated to Kentucky, where Cassius Marcellus Clay Jr., the previous name of Muhammad Ali, his birth name, was born in Louisville. Like, this all connects. It's not random factoids that don't have common threads and don't have some sort of tethering. It's all tied together. So to get to the Lewis fight, and this is where you kind of scratch your head and ask questions like what was going on in boxing, because there are sequences of events that really don't make sense. And if you didn't have the history to back you up, you would say, well, this can't be right. This is totally illogical. So you rewind the clock a year and a half before Ali fought Alvin Lewis. And you have the fight of the century, March of 1971. This incredible event, Frank Sinatra taking pictures at ringside, Woody Allen and Diane Keaton years before Annie Hall when they were dating, they're seated at ringside. Like, everybody who was anybody was at that fight. And there have been a lot of times in boxing history where you had like a super fight and it kind of fizzled out. But Ali Frazier 1 was a super fight that lived up to the billing. Neither guy, both guys brought their A game. Even though Ali wasn't quite as sharp as he could have been, maybe he needed a little bit more time after the tough fight he had with Bonavena a few months earlier. But it was legitimately a great fight. It's not, Leonard versus Hearns in 81. It's not Hagler Hearns in 85. It's certainly not even Ali and Frazier in Manila 4 years later. But it was a great fight. It was worthy of the buildup. You had two all-timers giving it their all. And, you almost wish that the fight wasn't over in 15. Let it go to 20, that kind of thing. Both guys could have kept going. They had endless motors back then. But after the loss to Frazier, I don't understand why there was not a return fight. Like, that's something that appears to have been lost to history. Nowadays, with social media, we would learn immediately Frazier doesn't want to fight Ali again right away, or Ali says, hey, Joe got me, I wasn't that sharp, he almost broke my jaw, whatever. But Ali stayed very busy. He fought Mac Foster, not Bob's brother, but he fought Mac Foster. He fought Jurgen Blin. He fought his old buddy from Louisville, also a former heavyweight champ who really was a puffed up light heavyweight, Jimmy Ellis. And he dispatched all of them pretty easily. And then in 72, he fought, later in 72, he fought Floyd Patterson. He fought Bob Foster. I think the Bob Foster fight was the next fight after Alvin Lewis. But the guy couldn't sit still. He was trying to stay active, and the idea was he wanted another crack at Joe Frazier. And what ended up happening was Frazier defended his title only twice. And I don't think that either of those guys should have been title contenders. He beat Ron Stander and he beat Terry Daniels. And, I understand that sometimes you have a heavyweight champion, and especially after a terribly difficult title defense, because when Frazier and Ali fought, Frazier was the champ. Ali was the undefeated former champion because he didn't lose his title in the ring. He lost his title in the courthouse, and then they all ended up having to more or less apologize. The Supreme Court could have sent him to prison for 5 years, but they said, nah, we're sorry. Mr. Ali, you really got fucked by the system. The military-industrial complex tried to chew you up and spit you out. This was a miscarriage of justice. You're free to resume your career. He was never the same. He wasn't really more than 75% of what he had been in 65, 66, 67. But the irony is, he had his greatest achievements in part because he wasn't as good, because he was no longer able to consistently dominate opponents, high-end opponents, as he had as a kid in the mid-60s. And even someone like Alvin Lewis, who would have been a tough out for almost anybody. He was a big guy, he could hit, he was fearless, he could take a good shot. But the Ali that Alvin Lewis faced, July of 72, was still fast as lightning. He still looked good. But the thing with Ali, he said a lot of stuff that he kind of hinted at the truth, but he didn't necessarily say it straight out. No fighter likes to admit that he's past his best. Nobody likes to admit the encroaching of father time, especially when you're still so young. That guy's 30 years old, for crying out loud. He was 28 when he made his comeback. By normal person standards, you're still a kid. But he'd already been around. He'd been in the public eye for more than a decade when he made his comeback. So he said things in his return after the Frazier fight, before the Frazier fight, but just in general. He was a gym rat. He was somebody who, he didn't really love the 4 a.m. jogs, like in a Rocky movie, drinking a dozen whole eggs and then going out for a 90-minute run in 10 degrees or whatever the heck he was doing there. But Ali talked about the difference. And it was an understanding that he was going to have to work even harder. And I remember an interview where he was discussing that his diet was the same, his road work was on point, his conditioning, the crazy calisthenics that he used to do to accentuate his impossible speed and reflexes. He was doing all of that, but his body didn't look the same. He had to work even harder to get that kind of Bruce Lee cut, if you will, where you have a fighter who doesn't necessarily train abs for the cosmetic look, but that he has that look. And so his body was not reacting to training the way that it had as a younger person. It was something that, if he thought about it too long, it would depress him. But the takeaway was, he could not dominate top level opposition. He was going to have to, he was still more talented than almost anybody, but it's different, because you look at what he did in the 60s, where he fought a lot of great fighters and made them look like amateurs. As the announcer Steve Ellis said in the first Liston fight, Cassius is making Sonny look like a sparring partner. He made Floyd Patterson, former world heavyweight champion, who was still a great fighter, he made Patterson look like a sparring partner. Ernie Terrell didn't get a round off of him in the What's My Name fight. Cleveland Williams could throw big bombs, booming shots. Cleveland Williams got fucking killed. Carl Mildenberger got knocked almost out of the ring in that fight. And here he is in the 70s, struggling to some extent. So when he went in the ring to fight Alvin Lewis, if you look at the fight, it's not really that great of a fight. It's not a sloppy fight. The guys, this was not Ali versus Wepner in 75, where they're fouling and Wepner is throwing rabbit punches and trying to hit him with elbows, a little bit of a WWF angle. I mean, that fight was ridiculous. There's an element of farce where at various points the fans are laughing as if the guys are trying to entertain them by seeing who can out roughhouse the other. Wepner throws 5 or 6 rabbit punches and Ali is pointing to the ref as if to say, bro, he's hitting me in the back of the head. Aren't you going to say something? Ref doesn't do shit. So Ali starts hitting him in the back of the head. Man, great stuff. They should have put that in the Rocky movie. Stallone must have gotten a kick out of that when he was watching that fight in advance of writing the screenplay for Rocky. But there's a funny moment in this fight. It's not really funny, haha, but it's funny where you start scratching your head. Now, with my knowledge of boxing history, there's always a lot of controversies with long counts, and this guy should have been knocked out, and he got a long count from the ref. I remember the Buster Douglas thing with Mike Tyson, where they said that Douglas was down for longer than 10. Deontay Wilder, the trilogy fight with Tyson Fury, there was controversy. They said on the second knockdown of Fury, he was down longer than 10. Hey, none of that shit makes any difference. I mean, it matters for people to argue about, but there's no rule that says that the ref has to count at a certain speed or cadence, and every ref has a different cadence. Now, in the case of the Buster Douglas Mike Tyson in 1990, Octavio Mayron, the ref, and a guy who had reffed a lot of title fights. He was not a novice. The guy knew what he was doing. But if you look at Mayron, for example, he had a slow cadence. He was the sort of a ref that you wanted your fighter to have if he was going to get knocked down and had any idea where he was, because you might have a couple extra seconds to scramble to your feet. Well, in the 5th round of the Ali Lewis fight, towards the end of the round, Ali lands a series of really big shots, left, right, and Lewis drops. And, we see fights, and the old saying by people such as Teddy Atlas and back in the day, Bert Sugar and guys like Ray Arcel, they would say if a fighter falls face first, he's usually fucked. Usually the fight's going to be over. But then there are other times where a guy goes down in such a way where you say, well, this fight is over. In the 5th round, Alvin Lewis went down in such a way where it seemed that the fight was over, but it was towards the end of the round, and I don't know what the ref was doing, but Lewis got to his feet at 9, and I think the round ended, or the round was about to end. And I forget who the announcer was, but the announcer said something like, "We may have witnessed the longest count in the history of boxing," or something like that. And I had not seen this fight in full until YouTube, when everything suddenly that could be available on YouTube was uploaded. And one of the best things about YouTube, if you're a boxing fan, is almost every fight from the all-time greats from Ali's era forward, you can find almost every fight, and usually in pretty good quality. The Alvin Lewis fight is in great quality, but that's not hyperbole. That was one of the longest counts ever, no doubt about it. It seemed like Lewis was on the canvas for like 20 seconds, and then the fight went on, and Lewis landed some shots. He was not giving up, and that's the thing. You can almost knock a guy out, but he gets back to his corner and he recovers. He comes out and he starts mixing it up. So according to legend, and this was in Ali's autobiographies, I think a lot of the autobiography was apocryphal stuff. It was co-written or ghost-written by a gentleman named Richard Durham, whose work I'm not familiar with other than The Greatest, My Own Story. That was the name of the Ali autobiography. Ali, in the autobiography, tells a story of this fight. And from the 5th round forward, when Ali scores this knockdown that he's on the ground, how is the fight not over? Ali he said he had to pee. He had to pee. He went before the fight. Why didn't you leave before we left? That was 2 days ago. Superman 2. Great line reading from Gene Hackman. But he had to pee. So he gets back to his corner in the 6th round, and he says to Dundee, he says, "Angie, I gotta pee." He doesn't say what the fuck. He's like, "I gotta pee." He says, "Well, get the guy out of here. You win the fight. What the hell are you telling me for?" So Lewis actually rallied and landed some significant punches as Ali was trying to get him out of there. And the fight didn't end until the 11th round, where Ali landed a fusillade of punches, and the ref stopped the fight. I mean, Lewis was just getting smashed. He had to stop the fight. And then Ali wasn't able to go to the bathroom for another 20 minutes. The fact that he considered this important enough to include in his autobiography, the fact that I had to go for about 40 minutes and I didn't know what I was going to, you imagine, disqualifying yourself. I got to take a shit. This is not something that you would have thought about, but reading it in the autobiography, it's interesting. You have to kind of time your water breaks and how you drink water before the fight, because you know what, guys, it's going to be hitting you in the kidneys. You could have things get fucked up. But he ended up winning the fight. And then Ali's next fight was the Bob Foster fight, which the only time he was ever cut in the prize ring. And he was in a lot better shape in the Lewis fight. The Bob Foster fight, he really didn't look that good. He was still fast, but he didn't look nearly as sharp in the Bob Foster fight as he did in the Lewis fight. But the Foster fight is a kind of an interesting, because we're seeing this now, for example, where Terence Crawford is moving up in weight to fight Canelo. Now, Canelo Alvarez, to me, is somebody whose best fighting weight is probably 10 to 15 pounds more than Terence Crawford's best fighting weight. And where I'm going with that is, Bob Foster was maybe the hardest hitting light heavyweight who ever lived. His left hook had the concussive force of a lot of, ranked heavyweights. Even though he was 175, maybe he would squeeze closer to 180 in the ring. He was a skinny guy with a crazy amount of power. Bob Foster landed the same kind of left hook that put Mike Quarry in the hospital and ended Dick Tiger's title reign. It's still one of the greatest single punch knockouts in history. Dick Tiger was only stopped once in his entire career. It was Bob Foster that stopped him. That's how Foster won the light heavyweight title. Foster at 175 plus against Ali was landing what should have been putting anybody on the ground, and Ali kept doing this thing where he was pretending he was fading and he was going to go down. And Foster, when he saw that, he would kind of subconsciously back up, says, "Now I made him mad. Now he's mad." That's always the thing. I think I made him mad. So Bob Foster cut Ali in that fight. It's the only time Ali was ever cut. And then he fought Floyd Patterson at the Garden in November of 72. And then at the end of the year, he fought Jurgen Blin. So Ali was really busy. Never stopped fighting. Never stopped trying to get the title shot. George Foreman had other plans. defeated Joe Frazier in January of 73. That threw everything into a tizzy. And then Ali fought Ken Norton, the first fight, lost. Didn't fight again until he fought the return match with Norton. He won. Norton got the title shot, the first title shot. I'm sorry, it was actually the second title shot. George beat Jose Roman. Norton got a title shot. George took him out in 2 in Caracas. That was not a competitive fight. Norton was psyched out. Norton was basically Michael Spinks against Mike Tyson. Much better fighter, relatively speaking, than Michael Spinks, certainly at heavyweight. But George was psyched out. Kenny was psyched out, and George just smashed him. It was not competitive. And then Ali beat Joe in the return fight, January of 74, also at the Garden. And then he beat Foreman in Zaire, 32. Now, when Ali was in Ireland for the Lewis fight, he didn't mix it up with, like, he didn't have time to look up any of his old relatives, the kind of thing that in 2009 was easier to do, because when he was there in 2009, he met with people who were part of that lineage, who technically were distant cousins. I mean, just really great stuff, great pictures, but you need the context of, well, wait, who is this person here? Well, that would probably be his fourth cousin, something like that. But Ali was a citizen of the world. And there was a documentary on him about 20 to 25 years ago called Through the Eyes of the World. And it took that approach, which was, he visited so many different lands. He met so many different kinds of people from every possible walk of life, that he really was a global citizen. And his humanitarian efforts, the fact that, the establishment, quote unquote, in the United States, the same kind of people who tried to chew him up and spit him out, ended up embracing him in his later years, getting the Presidential Medal of Freedom from George W. Bush. And it wasn't just that W had said, hey, I supported him in the 60s or whatever. He supported the fact that Ali went to bat for his father during the run-up to the first Iraq war, where there were a number of diplomats who were stuck in Iraq, and Ali went to Iraq and helped to get them released. Cliche though this may be, in the Muslim world, regardless of whether they were Americans or whether they were people from the Middle East, he was revered. He was worshipped by a lot of different kinds of people. But when he went to Iraq, everyone listened. And even that horrendous despot, Saddam Hussein, was not going to say no when Ali went to him and said, can you release these people in my care, please? He did it. It was about the most sensible thing that Hussein ever did, that horrendous, awful guy. But he listened. And Ali really was a man of the people. Cliche though that may be, it was true. And there's funny pictures of him in Ireland where they did this thing where a couple of the local cops pretended they were putting him under arrest. Like, he was a character. He had a good sense of humor, even about things that other people would not have wanted to make light of. The fact that he could have very easily, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. It was only because society turned so virulently against the Vietnam War. That was a big reason why he didn't serve any time, and why the Supreme Court overturned his conviction. They said, we can't come down on this guy. This war was a disaster. He was right. He was right. We deprived him of his rights. He should have been allowed to do what he did. Well, here we go. Conviction vacated. But those are all issues and stories for another day. 53 years ago today, Ali went to Ireland, reconnecting with his surprising Irish heritage and defeating a very tough and rugged sparring partner and friend, Alvin Lewis, at Croke Park in Dublin on July 19th, 1972. This has been episode 584 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your Saturday afternoon here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Until then, peace.